So we're going to be talking about teaching with primary sources outside of the humanities in this session. And several of us have experience with this, but of course, a lot of people just tend to think automatically, just assume that TPS is more of a humanities area thing. So we're going to talk about some ways that that is not always the case and what we have experienced and what we've done. So my name is Catherine Banks. I usually go by Katie. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm going to be talking today about TPS in a social work class at my institution, Milligan University. I am the solo archivist there, so I do everything, but instruction is really my passion. So this is a small liberal arts university of about 1,100 students, and it's a great community. And this was just a really great way that I was able to connect and talk about primary sources in an area I hadn't before. So, for a little bit of background, in spring of 2022, I had done a session for a humanities class that we had, our Intro to Women's and Gender Studies. And this was the class, the foundational class for our minor in Women's and Gender Studies. I knew the professor who was teaching that, and this was a really great session. I did a brief lecture, did an individual activity. So each student had an item from a curated teaching collection based on the history of women at my institution. And they got to spend some time analyzing the item they were given, and then to talk with each other and share with the group about what they had learned. And this was just a really great class. They were already a very tight knit class. It was fairly small, as is the case for our more specialized classes, and it they just seemed to have a really great time, and the professor was very appreciative. Now, sadly, by fall of 2023, the Women's and Gender Studies class was effectively defunct because the professor had left for a different institution. So that meant that there probably was not a good chance of that class being offered again anytime soon, since that had been her specialty. And we didn't really have anyone coming in to fill that role. So I was looking through the course schedule, and I noticed that there was a social work class called Gender and Society on the schedule. And I thought that this might be a similar enough class that I could essentially carry over some of the things that I had done, because this humanities class had gone really well, and the students had seemed to really enjoy looking at the material and learning from it. And I wanted to continue that on. I just didn't have this original space to do that anymore. So I reached out to the professor, and the professor was all on board. I had previously just done a one shot with the humanities class, but when I got together with a professor, whose name is Wendy, she said, well, let's spend a whole week talking about this. And I was thrilled for that, because I never get a chance to do more than one shots most of the time. So I was very excited to build more of a scaffolded approach and spend a week with these social work students. So what I did for the week that I got to spend with them is they met 3 times that week for 55-minute class periods. And I broke things down into basically 3 groups. So the first day I went to their classroom and I did a brief intro to our institutional history, just so they could have some context and know the history of the university, to be able to place some of these more specific items in that context later. I also introduced them to primary sources, which I had prepped lectures on, both the intro to the institutional history and then intro to primary sources that I use in most of my one shots. And I introduced them to how to work with those, and why they are a good part of the research process. So then we did what's called the speed dating activity, which comes, I'm blanking on who it is right now, but it is from one of the many wonderful workbooks out there of things, um, activities you can do for teaching with primary sources. So basically what I did is I had pulled several items that were from university history, kind of from my general teaching collection that I use with other classes. And I set them up on various desks, and they basically took time going around to each one and writing down just some brief observations about them. So they were able to go around and spend a little bit of time learning about institutional history and working with primary sources. So it just gave them kind of an introductory, hands-on approach to what we were talking about that day. So that was Monday of that week. Wednesday, what I had them do is they actually came to me in our library building. Unfortunately, my archive space does not have a dedicated reading room area that's big enough to host a class. It's very, very small. So what I did is I took kind of a classroom area that we have in the library, and I took them in there. And what I did with them that day is I gave them the more curated items that I previously used in that humanities class, and had them spend time analyzing those items relating to women's history. So they did individual analysis, and then I specially set them up so that they were at tables together with one other person, and that their items, when compared to each other, would hopefully generate some interesting conversation. So had them individually analyze the item and then pair up with the other person at their table to do some bias analysis and some more conversation with that. And they really seemed to enjoy doing that and comparing what they had with each other. And then on Friday, what we did is I went back to their classroom and brought the items that they had worked with. And then I gave them a chance for them each to talk about the item and what they had learned by spending time analyzing it, talk to the whole class, and discuss what they had learned. And then we worked together to create a Padlet timeline, where I basically popped in a digitized version of whatever item they had analyzed, and put it in order, so that they could then add their comments on what they had learned about it. So then the assessment, I actually forgot to ask them to do the assessment that day. And so the professor ended up asking them later and getting the feedback to me later. But I would say, just from a casual assessment point of view, it seemed like it went really well. This class was already a tight knit class. Like I said, a lot of our upper level classes are that way. And they really seemed to enjoy learning about things. There was a lot of, of course, outrage over old rules and things like that, because we did work around several historical documents that spanned, I believe, from the early 1900s to the 1990s. So it was really nice to be able to work with that, and to see how interested and invested they were in that. So I have here a quote from one of the students that came from my assessment. I learned archives not only tell us about the past, but they can help us study the present and future. I never found importance in archives besides gathering history, but now I understand how they can help us learn and study. We can see how the world is changing and evolving around us through the use of archives. So that was just one experience that they wrote down, but I know from just talking with them casually in class that they were really enjoying learning about what had happened with the history of women at our institution. Um, so I have a link here to the Padlet that we constructed together, and I will put that in the chat. Now I'm going to stop screen sharing so I can put that in the chat real quick. And you can take a look if you would like and see what they put together. So that's my experience of working with a social work class. So students who weren't normally used to spending a lot of time studying history, working with primary sources, but they seemed to learn a lot from it, and I would love to continue this in the future. So I'm going to hand it off, I believe, to Evan next. And we will be answering questions at the end after all of our presentations are done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. That's really fascinating for me, especially because I just had a preliminary meeting with a social work professor last Friday. So really exciting to hear that that work is already kind of being done, and I'm not because I felt like I don't know anything about social work. I'm, uh, liberal arts guy myself. So let's see, am I sharing my PowerPoint screen? Can y'all see that?
I don't see
No,
it.
I have not hit share yet. There we go.
There we
Sorry,
go.
we're a Teams campus, so that's my
Uh,
excuse. Um, so let's see.
Looks
Can
good.
you, okay, we're still good. Okay. So my name is Evan Spencer. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Outreach and Instruction Archivist at UT Arlington Special Collections. We are a campus of, I think, around 40,000 students, so a little bit different than Katie and Milligan, but I think doing hopefully similar work. And basically, what I'm going to talk to you today, we're talking TPS outside of the humanities. I'm going to talk to you about a bridge that we are building between our history department at UTA and STEM students and the STEM curriculum here through using our collections and the special collections space. So it's a little bit of a blended topic because I'm working with history classes in this case, but we're specifically appealing to the STEM students. And then I'll get into that a little bit more here. So a little bit of a background. Our history department here on campus is specifically trying to appeal to science and technology students. They are creating classes that the students will hopefully want to take and be excited about taking, and then also that administrators will be excited about and pushing their students towards. Um, that's interesting. I didn't click, but it came up anyway. Okay. So these are the classes that the history department has created so far. As you can see, there's a lot of them. I'm not going to read them all out because I'm mainly going to talk about these three. The sort of technology and science in American society, 1 and 2, and then medieval technology and scientific thought. But there are other classes that are being offered and again, specifically appealing to the STEM students and administrators, trying to make sure that they're getting on, making sure that the powers that be know that they're willing to work with STEM in this, 20th, 21st century direction that we're heading. So the interesting thing for us is that, sorry, the goal of these classes is to imbue these STEM students with liberal arts approaches. So they're not compromising that we're teaching history here. We're teaching critical engagement. We're engaging with primary sources. They're really not compromising like the essence of doing history. They're just presenting it in this way of, hey, we can replace your American History 1 class with a technology and science in American society 1 class. So those two survey classes do replace or serve to, or they meet the requirements for that gen ed requirement of American history. And, a lot of STEM majors have started to take those classes instead of the old, required courses, American History 1 and 2. So, what better way to create opportunities for these students using a liberal arts approach, um, you know, encouraging critical thinking and engage with primary sources than to bring them in to the archives. And so here I've got a picture of our main faculty partner, Dr. Kim Brewer, working with some of the students in one of those survey classes in this past spring semester. And she said she was going to come to the session today. I'm not sure if she is actually here or not, but if she has anything to add, I'll just open the floor to her in the chat. If y'all have questions for her, if she's here, I'm sure she would be willing to answer as well. Um, but so basically, in the survey classes, what we have done is these classes are very large, right? They're average probably 150 students. And so Dr. Brewer has designed it so that there are multiple different assignment paths that they can take. Not everybody's going to be into a primary source activity in the archives. And frankly, we don't have the room to host a 150 student class working, hands-on with our materials. So the goal has been to find about 30 students in each class that want to work in the archives. And so that's what we've done so far. And so these groups of 30 students come to the archives to view document sets that Dr. Brewer and I have curated. So we pre-curated sets of 5 to 6 documents or just materials. They can be maps or photographs, you know, correspondence. We've got, y'all know the types of materials. And we've curated sets based on things like civil engineering, railroad construction. We had a group do Six Flags Over Texas, which is here in Arlington, World War II, geology, river improvement projects. So we're trying to tap into that STEM interest, right? And find groups that are, find topics that are appealing to these groups. So one group last semester did the superconducting super collider, which in the 80s and 90s, they were trying to decide where to put the new super collider. And it was almost here in Texas. We were the runner up to Switzerland. So unfortunately, it's not, 45 minutes from campus, it's across the world, but we were close. So students got to work with these primary source materials that we pre-curated. The ultimate goal of this was for them to come to the archives and view these sets of materials. And then they got to ask research questions. If they wanted to, they could request additional materials or try to research and finding aids in our catalog to discover more. And then the purpose was that they would create a digitized version of their materials on our public reference scanner. And then the ultimate purpose was to create a module to go into their open educational resource textbook. These modules would include the digitized materials, but also include elements of analysis and allow future students to then use the same sets of documents and add their own analysis in future semesters. So the results, I think, of these original runs of these survey classes went okay. Mixed results. Some students were like super engaged. The Super Collider students went above and beyond. They even requested that we buy a secondary source to help contextualize their primary source research they were doing. Of course, we did that and helped them out, but other students showed up the first time. They took their scans and I never heard from them again. So maybe their research was great. I don't really know. And from what I've heard from Dr. Brewer, I think the final products, those modules, needed a little bit more help or work along the way. Um, so we are actually in the next steps of this project now moving forward. Dr. Brewer has applied for and gotten our faculty teaching in the archives grant for the upcoming academic year. So that's formalizing some of this process. She's got graduate student researchers doing that pre-curation work. So identifying materials, finding the topical connections, and then doing the scanning work as well for the modules. And then the modules are now becoming we've changed the terminology, and they're going to be called Mav Vault kits, which will be hosted in our institutional repository, again, including the digitized materials. But then the students will create videos explaining the materials. They'll get to interview faculty and staff experts on campus to help provide that context. And then this is still like very much happening right now. Just got an email from Dr. Brewer yesterday talking about trying to bring in some of the science education students as well on this project so that they can help us build out activities for K through 12 students. So these modules, these kits will be open source and available for free. And the idea is to make them distributable across, K through college education levels. So hopefully we'll be getting some of these science education majors in to help develop the sort of curricular side of things as well. Um, so pretty exciting stuff going on there. And again, this is a history class, but it's almost all non-history students in these classes. Um, so the other class that we've worked with is the medieval science and technology class, which was last spring. And this class embedded with us, this is an upper level class, so it's about half history majors and then half STEM majors who are just interested in medieval science and technology. So it was a pretty good mix of different backgrounds among the students. So this class embedded with us every Friday for the first half of the spring semester for about an hour each day, although a lot of students came before and stayed after too. And their ultimate goal was to partner with us on an existing exhibition that we were working on, um, and then also make a digital exhibit. So the physical exhibit that they helped us with was ahead of the total solar eclipse that happened on April 8th. Hopefully, some of you were in the path of totality and you got to experience that. Uh, I'm not here to present about that today, but please try to see totality at some point in your life if you get any opportunity. Um, and so basically they helped us, write captions, they helped us research the materials, they helped with some of the narrative text, and then they also took their medieval science and technology research that they're doing in class, the readings, the discussions that they're doing, and then applied that knowledge to our materials, which are early modern, really starting in the 16th century up until the 18th century, and contextualize those with that medieval science and technology in their digital exhibit. So a couple of the takeaways from this project for me um, were that I think the results were mixed, and a big part of that was that I was curating the exhibit on eclipses, and there was an eclipse coming, and we were going to capitalize on that opportunity. And so the class was more broadly focused by nature, um, and I couldn't really give them the space to make like curatorial decisions you know, um, or any sort of descript like the physical exhibit was going to be about eclipses, and there wasn't really any wiggle room on that. Luckily, the digital exhibit did offer that wiggle room, and they were able to focus in on the class discussion. So, um, the other thing that was a real positive, though, was that students, both from a history background and outside of liberal arts, got to experience, archival research on a pretty deep level. They were working with sets of materials, for weeks to try to really understand them and really, dive deep and understand them so that they could then describe them in an exhibit. So they got to write caption text, they got to write narrative text, and they got to write metadata for the digital items. So they had to learn how to think about and present information in different ways than maybe any of them were accustomed to, you know, having mostly worked with, research papers in their college career. So I think there was a lot of a positive as well. And then in terms of next step for this, Dr. Brewer and a physics professor are currently working on a history of astronomy class that will be really rooted in our materials. Um, and so, we've got these celestial atlases and rare books covering the history of astronomy, dating back to Copernicus. And these classes will heavily rely on the use of our materials, and it'll be built right into the curriculum for that class. This class will be cross-listed between history and physics, which I've never heard of anyone doing that before. It certainly hasn't happened on our campus before. So you could take it for physics credit or for history credit. So I wanted to leave y'all too with some of my sort of final takeaways. The UTA history department has really created a lot of buzz for themselves and opportunities by creating these classes that specifically appeal to STEM majors and administrators. And that's not that's not me, right? And I know we're not usually in a position to advocate like with department heads, and we're not making these curricular level decisions. But I think UTA's example, I'm hoping that maybe it inspires some TPS folks here to pitch activities that kind of trend this way. So if you know that there's a survey class on your campus that isn't really filled with history majors, maybe you can, target that class specifically by saying, hey, maybe we appeal to some of the STEM students who are in these classes by doing, curating sets like that. The second thing that is kind of my big takeaway is that when I'm working with large groups of sort of entry level students, they haven't worked in archives before, they're not really familiar with finding aids and that sort of thing. Um, if the goal is for them to become familiar with finding aids, that's one thing. But if the goal is to get them working directly with materials, I think pre-curation is very, very necessary in those cases. Now, encouraging like further research in the students who want to take that on is great, and that's what we kind of did with that survey class. But having the sets of documents ready to go has helped our staff not be overburdened with like, oh crap, that class is coming in, we need to have like 6 people on hand so we can go run and pull stuff that they're looking to see. Um, and then finally, special collections, I think, can help be the connector between STEM and liberal arts. I think we have the means to study history of science and technology in our collections often, and I don't normally think of them that way as like, hey, we could study science with this, but I think that there's a lot of untapped potential in a lot of our primary sources for that. And if you'll forgive my final pun, I think we can build the bridge because we have the materials to build the bridge. And then I've got my great photo here of a bridge being built in Fort Worth. So um, thank y'all for your time, and I hope to continue the discussion. Feel free to email me. It's in the slides and or in the chat here. And I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay now, if I can figure out how to stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you. And let me figure out how to share. Here we go. I was just putting my slides in the chat in case you want them. And actually, listening now to Katie and Evan, I actually have a couple other documents I might share with you too, because I'm thinking about some of these questions of like our full lesson plans and our outreach and things like that. And so I have a few other Google Docs that I will pop in here about what I've been doing after I share this with you. So I'm Lindsay Anderberg. I am the interdisciplinary science and technology librarian and the poly archivist at New York University. Our library is on the Brooklyn campus, which is where our Tandon School of Engineering is. The Poly Archives are because we used to be a standalone engineering school university called Brooklyn Polytechnic. Actually, that name's changed 7 times too. Lots of authority fun. But NYU purchased our engineering school 10 years ago. So the poly archives, poly archivist name is sometimes confusing, but that is what it is. Our collections are all kind of focused around what you would imagine sort of university archives for an engineering school to look like. So all those yearbooks, photographs, but also like, as you can see in this collage slide, like, things that have come back to us from engineers who had been working in the field. So that could be schematics, it could be prototypes, there can be physical materials. And I have been in this position for 13 years. So I have, and I've been very excited about doing the teaching of primary sources with our STEM student population during that time. So I have examples here of different ways that this can play out, at least how they've played out for me so far. And hopefully this could be helpful because these really range from sort of like a one-off, like not super in-depth kind of, or maybe a first stab at trying a partnership or something, to something that becomes increasingly programmatic. So you can really try any of these things or build up to any of these things. But the 3 main ways that I think about how I'm using STEM archives with our students is in non-STEM classes. So this is mainly within, so as a librarian, I'm a liaison to our department that's called Technology, Culture, and Society. So that's for more of like your history of science and ethics and things like that, that sit alongside all of our engineering curriculum. Students do need to take, there are course requirements that they have to take within that department. And also we have an expository writing program. The engineering students also have to take 2 semesters within the expository writing program in their first year. So when I'm talking about working in these non-STEM classes, it's pretty much in these, you know, humanities and writing classes that the engineering students have to take, that can really be a mixed bag. Like some of the engineering students just find these as sort of an annoyance that they have to like get through. Some of them find them like sort of a fun, you know, elective. But the non-STEM classes, I would say, is like the bulk of where I've had a lot of success in using our engineering school primary sources to work with these undergrad engineering students, just because that subject matter is so easy to kind of you know, to go together. So like, for example, this Polytechnic's Cornerstone of Strength, men, with a very heavy-handled chiseled block. This is the cover of one of our brochures and fundraising campaign brochures from 1954. I use this as one of the items in a lesson that I call Who is an Engineer, where we explore over a period of time. So like our school began in 1854, it was all men, it was all white. What has it looked like as our school, as our student body and engineering as a whole has diversified? So like that has such easy ties to our collection, fits in with one of the core writing themes for the expository writing, also fits really well into, like, similar to Katie, there's a class within TCS that often pops up that's kind of like gender and engineering. And so those are easy to kind of slot into those classes. So some of this is kind of looking at what are those essay themes that they're going to be teaching, what special topics classes are popping up, and where can our collection support that? Lots around ethics, lots around also just ideas of kind of the history of innovation or technology. There's a lot of ways that we can fit those into the way that all of that curriculum is already set up. So I would say that is kind of like the biggest chunk of teaching I'm doing with the students. The thing that I have worked on over the years, kind of to lesser success, I think it's the harder thing to do, is to fully integrate the archives and teaching with primary sources into STEM classes, because of that deep subject knowledge. There's kind of 2 things, right? I never took an engineer. I'm not an engineer. I don't know I don't know that subject knowledge, right? So I need a lot more support to be able to do that. And also the engineering curriculum is like jam-packed. I mean, they have to get through so much that it can be difficult to pitch putting in a historical element or something within the classes. However, there are a few times where through more work on my part and more work on faculty members' part, we have made it happen. But I would say that these are the more difficult and more time-consuming ones to try to do. Greater success, I would say, and this is really going to vary depending on who your clubs and who your students are, but sometimes those STEM-focused clubs can get really excited about your historical stuff. So that can be a little easier sometimes. And then finally, as I've been doing this, you know, now for over a decade, a lot of what was started as kind of like one-off teaching in classes, or maybe even like a few successive classes with the same professors, developed into both. One, I've now adjunct teach a class within this TCS department that's all about our archives. And 2, from that class, I've now been moving students into this student curator role. So I have students that are engineering students, but they are curating our exhibits. So I will tell a little more about all three of these. So just a few more examples from our non-STEM classes. You can see some of these like names of the lessons, I would call them, and the essay themes, and how you can see how these can fit really nicely because our collections have, you know, for example, we have from the Samuel Rubin papers over on the left, it's like Samuel Rubin was an inventor of batteries. So we have 162 of his original patents. You can look at patents and you can look at patents as a document, kind of an object, even if you don't understand all the science, you can look at the diagrams and the way that it's written. And you can look at that and you can also look alongside an advertisement for this thing that they're making and how these batteries can fit into all of these different devices. And then alongside that, we have photographs, we have other types of documentation. So you can kind of take all these different bits, put them together and think about if they need to write an essay called Innovation in Context, right? The archives fit in so nicely in there. Similarly with this other collection on the top right, I have the Keller Mechanical Engineering Corporation collection. This was a tool and die company. We have ads, we have schematics, we have prototypes, we have photographs, we have written, we have blueprints and written diagrams, which is really cool. And then I also sometimes do this thing where it's like more kind of a biographical highlighting of one of our either professors or alums that we have a collection for. So like on the bottom right, you can see this is a bunch of passports that all belong to the polymer scientist Herman Mark. And his passports are from the early 30s, 1930s up until the 1960s. And through just the passports alone, you can see that this is a person who's moving from Austria through Nazi-occupied Germany, getting Canadian immigration cards, and then finally landing in the US, where he's reestablishing this field that he's begun in polymer science in Austria. So there's like a lot that we can talk about here with scientists as people, and also where kind of social, political, global events can also impact the way that people and science play out. So you can see how all those themes work great in non-STEM classes, but are also like pretty interesting to our engineering students, our engineering undergrads. And also in a lot of cases, the engineering undergrads will know more about like how certain things work in terms of like a computer science or electrical engineering or mechanical engineering component. And that really helps me too to understand our archive. So it's great to have conversations about that. I think anyone who's worked with students in this way, I think can get some really nice quotes where everyone is like, wow, look at all the ways that I now understand things in different ways. Now that I've worked with archival materials and seen different formats and seen things from different perspectives. So these are just a couple of nice quotes from these engineering undergrads who were using these types of materials in their first year writing courses. Okay, so the STEM classes and clubs. I had a great time with our undergrad physics club. This was, although I have not, the physics club kind of dissolved. They will kind of like come back in and out over the years. So these pictures are actually from almost 10 years ago now. But I have this Judith Bregman collection. Judith Bregman was a physicist, and in the early 60s, she was developing these teaching films for physics. So we got the films digitized. The students, so in addition to watching the films, which the students were like, oh, actually, this is cool. This explains like a packet of an uncertain Gaussian, I think was the one. I didn't understand it, but they understood it. They said it was cool. To me, it just looked like a trippy 70s film. It was cool. But then I pulled out a few boxes of supplemental archival materials and they were like, oh, this is fun. We can read what students thought of this film in the 70s. We can see where this was screened. And for them, even just looking at physical film, these students, these engineering students were basically reverse engineering, understanding how film frames worked, how many frames per second, because this is not something that was native to them. So that's why they're unspooling all the film, because they were like, oh, I get it. That's how things move. It was neat. So that was just with the physics club and finding a collection that worked with them during kind of their club meeting time. I've also done a little bit of integration into our full-on, like engineering classes. One that's been really successful is that in civil engineering, there's one class on writing environmental impact statements, and our campus was redeveloped in the early 90s. So we have the environmental impact statement, and we also have all kinds of supplemental materials that go along with that, maps and architectural plans and developer plans and renderings and photographs. And so we can really use that as sort of like a nice little piece of like how this has looked and how this plays out in the different sections of an environmental impact statement. The only other place that I've really kind of tried this and it hasn't totally come through is in fluid mechanics using some of our technical reports. That required a lot of work with the mechanical engineering professor because again, like I cannot totally understand the technical reports in fluid mechanics and mechanical engineering. We're still trying to figure out a way to kind of really integrate those in a way that's going to be successful. Finally, shout out to my student curator program, which I started a few semesters ago and is still going strong. Basically, this is, we have all of our physical exhibits in the library are now curated by undergrads who are all, these various flavors of STEM major at our school. And this is I actually just, the last session I was talking all about this, so I won't go in depth, but basically to say, kind of developed a pipeline to get these students into doing this research and then being able to put it up in our space. What I think has been really cool is that the students get to pick what they want it to be. So sometimes that means, like, for example, Tommy, who did in spring 2023, did Noel in the picture phone. He was a computer science engineer, and he was really excited to look into the work of a computer scientist from the 1970s, understand how this picture phone was working. Like, that was the thing that he was excited about, was like this history of science in his discipline. Whereas Madi, who did the exhibit next, really wanted to connect in with his personal experience of being a Muslim student within an engineering school and wanted to connect in with the alumni and other students and other people in the field who were also shared that same identity. So like students can really pick which way they want to go. And no matter which way they go, all of these students have had like really great things to say about this. And it's really been exciting to not have like history majors curating our exhibits, but to have our STEM undergraduate students either exploring a part of their identity through our collections or being able to really kind of get deeper into their major and their discipline through our collections.